Hey everyone. Tonight is number 4 of our trauma videos. We're going to be talking about the blue zone tonight. So just to recap, we've gone over how the brain works for trauma. We've talked about big T trauma and little t trauma. We have also talked about the window of tolerance pieces. We've talked about the red zone, which is what we talked about yesterday. And today we're going to talk about the blue zone. So the blue zone has some similar qualities to the red zone, but is not completely the same. It has a very different function. So what we call the red zone is hyperarousal. So that's when we shoot up like a rocket. But after we shoot up like a rocket, we need a fall. Our body needs to come back down. And so this can be a regulated process, but it also can be a very dysregulated process. Excuse me. So the blue zone is classically called our freeze response. There's actually a description of this that scuba divers get taught called the dive response. And this is a very basic thing that what happens is when you go down far enough, your body senses that it's not safe. And so it goes into this survival mode to keep you alive in the dive response, or to keep you alive as long as you can. And what it does is it pulls all the blood from every extremity of your body to your brain and your chest. And the reason it does this is because ultimately it's trying to protect your brain and your heart and lungs. And the reason it's trying to protect those organs is because you can't live without those organs. Everything else, you can figure out how to survive without. Not well, but you can survive without them. And so it pulls all the blood to that area so that you get ready to sustain as long as you can. When we're talking about severe trauma, though, let's take, for example, if someone's going through a really awful sexual assault. Lots of people talk about how they froze up in the sexual assault and they literally felt like they were floating away from their body. That's like the extreme version of the dive response. What's happening there is your body's shutting down and literally getting ready to die because this event is so awful that you can't figure out any other way to deal with it. And so you've got all the blood pooling around your basic extremities, slowing everything down. Your heart is slowing super slow. Your thinking is going way down. And what's happening is your brain is kicking off endorphins. Endorphins are the body's painkiller. They're the feel-good chemicals that say, hey, if you're going to go out, I'm going to make you feel good. And then there's this term that we use called dissociation, which just means we disconnect from the now. And we're not able to keep connection with the reality. And that's why a lot of people who are going through massively traumatic events in a moment can't remember anything because they literally have left the situation. They've left reality. They don't have any connection to the present at all. And then there again, you've shut down. We talked about shutting down the hippocampus part of the cortex. And now you no longer have an actual story that goes through it, but your body remembers. Your body remembers going through these awful events. And so sight, sound, smells, touches, all of those things, those senses, again, hearing, all of those senses can trigger us. But then again, we go back just like the red zone. If we don't have a context to it, that makes it even worse, and we dive deeper and deeper into depression. The deepest levels of the blue zone is deep, deep depression and even suicidality, or the actual attempt at suicide. And that's why it makes rational sense to someone who commits suicide. Not that it's a good thing, but we have to understand that in that moment, for that person to make such a drastic decision, it's at that moment the only decision that makes sense to them. And that's because they're so deep in the blue zone that nothing else matters. Nothing else can connect to reality. And just like the red zone that we talked about yesterday, no new learning can take place. And when no new learning can take place, it's hard to pull ourselves out of that. Now, here's the problem. If we get into this blue zone as a way of coping in life, as someone who's a former addict, I can tell you that part of my coping with stressors was diving to the blue zone, and I used my addiction to do that. I used my addiction to disconnect from reality and to just ease pain. And that's what makes addiction sometimes really hard. But not just addiction, anything that causes us to disconnect from reality, it's really hard. And then if you can't learn, you can't gain new skills to get out of that. So part of what we do to help people get out of that is kind of shock the system. That's where smelling salts come in, or we use really cold ice. The tip skill is one of the skills that we teach, where we teach you how to regulate or extreme intense temperature, either cold or hot, will kind of shock your nervous system back into being. So the blue zone, that freeze response, that's probably where more judgment is given to ourselves than any other response we give. Like, we understand if we run away, we understand if we fight something. There's sometimes a story we can tell ourselves with that. If we run away, then we lived to fight another day. If we fought that thing and maybe even got beat, there's still a story attached to it. When we freeze, though, we think that we're weak. We think that we're spineless and cowards and all of these things. I should have done this. In reality, most of the time we couldn't fight whatever was coming at us. And so that was the reason we froze. This is the reason that deer freeze. This is the reason that lots of animals freeze when super dangerous things are coming at them. They don't have any other choice but to freeze because there's nothing they can do anyway. And yet we judge ourselves harshly, super harshly, in the blue zone. And that's one of the contributors that keeps us stuck there. And so one of the things we do to kind of help people get over this is really step away from judging themselves. Start to put the situation in context and start to understand most of the time there wasn't really anything you could do. If you're a little kid and you're going through a massive beating, or you're even getting sexually assaulted or being shot at, or all these crazy things that can happen to us, who trains for that in life? Who prepares for that? Navy SEALs, Army people, Marines, those guys train for that. CIA agents, going back to the football player analogy, those people do lots of things to stop their body from responding automatically. I don't know of any training anywhere that prepares someone for getting raped. I just don't. And it makes complete sense if you freeze in that situation, because how do you wrap your head around such a violent thing happening to you? So learning self-compassion for ourselves, learning to put the situation in context, is one of the ways that we get out of the blue zone. Understanding what happens in the blue zone, that deep depression, that deep depersonalization of ourselves, that deep dissociation from reality. Those are all things that we can overcome, but we can't overcome them until we accept that they're happening to us. So number 4 of the trauma series, I think I'm actually going to do 2 more videos. I'm going to do one more on the green zone, and then I'm going to do another video on some coping strategies, and I kind of went into a little bit of those tonight, and really some hope for trauma, because ultimately everything is about how we learn to deal with things. So hope you found this helpful. There again, post any questions or comments in the comment section. So have a good night, guys.